Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about curriculum. We've talked about it in a couple other places, just a little bit. But what I really want to express to you is the difference between having activities and having curriculum. I want you to have activities. This is pretty basic. Every program has lots of activities that the kids do. They have potato heads, they have blocks to build with, they have paper, they have crayons. These are activities. This is not a curriculum. A curriculum has to have three things. It has to have goals and objectives. It has to have things to do, or your activities, and then it has to have assessment. Now, the goals can be for the class as a whole or for individual children, but there have to be goals. They can be short-term, they can be daily, but you need to have them in order for it to be a curriculum. What are you hoping to accomplish? And then you have to have the activities that help to set that up, and then you have to have a way to assess. One of the ways that a lot of programs like to do their curriculum is in themed units. So we're going to take a themed unit that you may be familiar with. Bears. For some reason, bears seem to show up very often in programs, probably because so many programs have teddy bears and they need to figure out something relevant to do with them, or just because it comes towards the beginning of the alphabet and programs like to perhaps have a letter of the month or a letter of the week. Goals. What do you hope that children will learn in a unit about bears? Do you want to learn them to learn that koalas aren't bears and pandas aren't bears, but black bears and grizzly bears are bears? Do you want them to learn what they eat? Do you want them to learn that there aren't very many bears in Texas? Do you want them to be able to sort bears into different categories? Do you want to learn about where bears are in the world? Do you want them to learn about stories that are based upon bears? So maybe it's basically a literature unit and you want to expose them to new stories. Any of these are possibilities. There's probably 10 more. I seem to find for myself, my own personal time as a teacher, that doing that unit about what bears do and what bears eat seems to work pretty well for most age groups. Sometimes the after schoolers not so much because they've already been there, done that. They know about herbivores. But for all the other age groups, you can probably do this. In the infant room, your bears are going to be limited to maybe doing finger plays about bears and things like that to help them gain awareness of different parts of their body. But with your children who are verbal up to maybe early elementary school, you can do this bears and learning about bears and what they do and what they eat, and the fact that the mothers stay with their children for several years and that they go fishing and things like that. So if what we're wanting them to know is that bears are somewhat like people and that they eat a lot of the same things, then you're going to have activities that relate to that. You might read Blueberries for Sal and talk about how, so you read that book and then you go, well, how many of you guys have eaten blueberries? And then maybe you have blueberries as a snack because Sal likes blueberries and the baby bear likes blueberries. There's Jessie Bear, what will you wear? What will you wear in the morning? Does that have anything to do with food? Doesn't. But I like the book. Can I use it anyway? Yes, you can use things that don't directly go to your goals. That happens all the time. But think about the things that do relate to your unit. Bears eat oatmeal. People eat oatmeal. Of course, bears don't make it quite the same, but they do eat them. We talk about how bears have a family structure. So maybe we have these small little counters in the daddy bear, the mommy bear, and the baby bear size. And we talk about how bears have those too, and how mommies stay with the babies for years. And how the babies come back to visit the mommies when they get to be big and they go on field trips or picnics together. How a lot of times the daddy bears teach the younger bears how to go fishing. For some reason, male bears seem to be better at fishing than female bears. Odd things that you learn having done this unit several times. So those kinds of things would help with that unit. So having them practice fishing, because bears go fishing. So maybe you have a fishing station. That also is going to help them with their fine motor skills and their gross motor skills. Those sticks with a string and a magnet on the end, and then you have to catch a fish with it, is a great activity for the older children. What else? If we're trying to teach them how bears are like us. How do they walk? They can climb trees. Can we climb? Talking about those kinds of things. So practicing the bear crawl down on the ground. Practicing that bear crawl down on the ground where they crawl around on their back feet and their front feet. And then standing up big like a big bear and making maybe the woofing noises that bears make when they're scared. And what noises do people make when they're scared? Those kinds of things can be incredibly wonderful things to do with our kids when we're doing that unit on bears. Think about what you want them to learn. Or do you just want them to learn maybe the different types of bears? That there are polar bears and there are black bears and there are, I think they're the sun bears from South America that look like they have glasses on. And maybe you put the panda and the koala in there just because people call them bears. And we're not worrying too much about whether they really are. We're just going to add them anyway. Maybe you're going to want to do geography and you're going to talk about Australia, which is why you need the koala bear. And you're going to talk about China, which is why you want the panda bear. And you're going to talk about India, and then you're going to talk about, I think it's called the honey bear, I can't remember. And Australia, and Europe, and you're going to talk about the black bear, and North America, and you're going to talk about the grizzly bear and the polar bear, and South America, and you're going to talk about that sun bear, I think is his name. All of these are possibilities. Think about what you want them to get out of it. Then how do you assess? Sometimes the activities are their own assessments, because you're sitting there and you're eating blackberries and you hear the kids talking about how, I wonder if this is a kind of berry that bears like. So they like blueberries and maybe they'll like blackberries too. What do you think? And they have a conversation about it. Or they're out on the playground and you said, okay, let's practice being bears. And then the children take it on and they use those movements in other games. It depends on what you're trying to teach as to what your assessment's going to be. But this is how you have true curriculum. Otherwise, you just have activities and there's coloring sheets that you send home. How much do you learn from a coloring sheet? It helps the parents because then the parents know what you were talking about. So having things that go home is an excellent and an invaluable tool for your parent communication. But it's not curriculum. It's an activity in your curriculum. It is an element of your parent communication. It is not the curriculum. The book is not the curriculum. All three elements are your curriculum. Okay. Some of you, I'm sure, when I was talking about assessment and curriculum, were wondering, are we doing tax tests in the infant room? Are there now tax tests going to be happening in preschool? No. Assessment is sometimes done before you set your goals and objectives, and sometimes it's done after you've done the activities. In your textbook, there is an infant assessment for young infants, non-mobile infants. I believe it's labeled from 6 weeks to 5 months. And it deals with several different areas of developmental progression. And you want to do those checklists at least every 6 months. But my suggestion would be that you do it every month or 2 months so that you can see, is a child stuck in a certain area? Because we have a tendency with child development to think that it progresses in a nice linear fashion, but in reality, it goes in fits and starts, and there'll be an area of development that's going and going and going, and another area that's stagnant. And if this happens for a couple months, it's no big deal. But if this happens for 6 months, we've got an issue with whatever has stagnated, and we need to figure out, is there a developmental issue, or is it just not something that the child is naturally interested in? So we need to use that area that's going zoom, zoom, zoom to pull that along. So at least every 6 months, you want to do a developmental assessment of each of your children for best practice's sake. And when you've got children under 3 in your program, if you can do it more often, that would be better. Because if you have a child with a developmental delay, the quicker that that is caught, the more likely it is that they'll be able to make up those deficiencies or those problems. If you don't start speech therapy until you're 10, it's really hard to get all the way back up to good language proficiency. But if you start at 2, the chances are really good. In addition, you might do an assessment of how did that curriculum work. So there is a lesson plan in your textbook. Go ahead and flip to it. It's the one that is called Lesson Plan with Goals and Objectives. When you look at that, you can see that there's goals and objectives. So let's talk a little bit about what are some ways that we could do an assessment of this classroom either before or after we did this lesson plan. So one of the goals in this lesson plan is to increase fine motor control with scissors. So what we could do is at the beginning of the week, perhaps, or maybe the week before, check to see how many of the children can do a certain scissor task. Cutting a straight line of 2 inches. And then we do all of the activities in the lesson plan, and then at the end of the week do the same thing just to check, see how everybody's doing. And that way you'll find the children that they're done. They don't need any more practice with this, and so this will then become maybe a comforting activity for them to do, as opposed to one that has any stress. And then you'll also find the children that need more work in that area. So sometimes it's an entire classroom that we're assessing, and sometimes it's an individual child. There are lots of developmental assessments out there. Learning Links has some available. I don't think they're on the website. You have to call and ask us specifically for them. But there's other ones out there that work just as well. Please find one that works for your program based on your goals and objectives and your quality demonstrations in your program, and do developmental assessments with your kids at least every 6 months. And have your teachers do assessments of their curriculum, of their lesson plans. Did that lesson plan work? If not, please don't recycle it in 6 months or a year. What needed to be tweaked and changed? You need to be continuing to grow your program. And if you're not looking at where you are and where you're going, it's going to be real hard to make sure that you're making those progressive changes for your program. Additionally, I want to talk about assessing your staff, at least after as they're moving from probationary employees to full-time permanent or part-time permanent employees. You want to do an assessment of how they're doing in the classroom. This needs to not be an assessment of that day. You need to be looking at them over time, and we talk about that in observation. But I want, when you do assessments of your staff, I want you to look at a period of time, not just a single day or week. In addition, it's a good idea to have annual assessments of your staff. This can be tied to their anniversary date, or you can do all of your staff at one time. It's whatever works for you at your program. I'm a fan of doing it with your anniversary date because it's less work for me at one time. But other people like to get it all done at once. So when you're doing those assessments of your staff, you can do it just being the director assessing her staff, or you can do what's called a 360 evaluation where the teachers assess one another. Your clients do an assessment of them. They do a self-assessment as well as their supervisor doing an assessment. That's called a 360 evaluation because you get input from everyone. And you can do something in between. You can have one where each teacher does their own self-assessment and the director does one. Again, there's lots of different ways to go about this. And there are some materials available. Figure out what works for your program. But it needs to be an annual assessment if you want to make sure that you are challenging your staff and your staff are continuing to grow and develop and become who they want to be. After you've done the assessment, you do that same thing, set your goals and objectives, and have activities through the year to see that they're progressing, just like curriculum for the children. So we use the same tools whether we're moving our staff forward, moving our program forward, or moving the curriculum forward. Make sure that you follow all three things. If you're doing a training for your staff, you need to have those goals and objectives. You need to have activities, sort of like some of the activities we're doing with you, and then a way to assess whether they received what they needed. Some licensing reps are a little concerned about trainings given by directors, even though you're entitled to give 50% of the training to your staff. But if you have an assessment tool on the back of the certificate's here, and on the back there's the assessment tool, your licensing rep's not going to have any questions that your staff actually learned something. That can be a quiz, but it can also be them writing what they learned, what they're going to change in their classroom. Look at the Texas Child Care Quarterlies. Those summaries at the back are a good guide of another way to do an assessment. Keep moving forward with your assessments. If you've got children who aren't progressing, if you have children who have developmental issues, either strengths or weaknesses, failure to do assessments shortchanges your children and makes your program less effective. So do assessments of your kids at least once every 6 months, and of your staff at least once a year. Don't forget to do one of yourself. That's why you have the second copy of your time self-assessment, and do other types of assessment of yourself. There's the, in your management section, there's one about are you walking the walk and talking your talk, as far as being an engaged manager. Okay.
Welcome back to curriculum. Now, Carrie has already talked to you about what is curriculum, what is the difference between curriculum and a schedule, what you need to do to make that curriculum work in your program, how to make that curriculum age appropriate. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about not how to create a curriculum, but why you need a curriculum. Curriculum is all about marketing, making yourself different. So whether or not you use a curriculum that you've created, so it's a custom created curriculum, whether this curriculum is out of a box, not a big deal. A lot of programs use a curriculum that's right out of a box. Are you using a schedule to implement that curriculum? So in addition to a curriculum, you also have a schedule, or are you just using a schedule? Are you using nothing? The kids are kind of on a free-for-all and they're doing what they need to be doing. These are all things that you get to sell as the advantages in your program. You need to be able to explain to the parents the appropriate milestones that the kids should be having using your curriculum. Now, as you develop your curriculum, you're also going to develop educational philosophy. And educational philosophy is kind of coupled with, or such as, things like Montessori as an educational philosophy. You might love some things about Montessori but not be ready to be a Montessori program. It's okay. You can still use some of those ideas and suggestions in your program. Waldorf, these are all examples, and you can find a list of examples of different types of curriculum or educational philosophies above and beyond academics or just having a schedule or the kids just getting lots of exercise. So think about what you want your program to be related to curriculum so that you can include that curriculum in your marketing. It's going to be in your marketing, in your brochures, on your websites. It's going to be marketed as you're walking the tour, walking families through your program. It's going to be used when hiring your staff. So understanding the role that curriculum plays in all these different areas is really, really important for you. We hope that you've enjoyed getting to hear a little bit about how to work with curriculum and how to create curriculum. As a director, one of the things you need to do is incorporate that curriculum into your hiring process. So take advantage of having that curriculum or knowing what your education philosophy is, including that in your job descriptions as well as in your want ads. As a director, your role with curriculum looks very different than your role as a teacher. Now, if you come from a large program and you have somebody who's in charge of curriculum, then what you need to know as the director is what are the appropriate milestones? What are the things you need to sell your parents on? If you have any questions, feel free to contact us at texasdirector.org, and we'll be happy to point you in the direction. But make sure that you are networking within professional organizations, that you are a member of local associations as well as state and national associations, because a lot of times new curriculum is showcased at conferences and at workshops. We look forward to getting to know you a little bit better, and have a great day.